The howling wind carried death on its breath as Nora Winters clutched her infant twins to her chest, their small bodies barely protected by the thin blanket wrapped around them. The blizzard had come without warning, burying the frontier town of Silver Creek, Colorado, in 3 feet of snow overnight. Her husband James was 6 months dead, consumption taking him before he ever saw his children born. Now, as the December storm of 1875 raged on, Nora found herself abandoned on the outskirts of town. The wagon that had promised to take her to her sister's home in Denver disappearing into the white void, the driver deciding 3 passengers weren't worth the risk of death. "Hush now," she whispered to little Emma and Elijah as they whimpered against her, their faces red from the cold. "Someone will come, someone must come." But the words rang hollow even to her own ears. Silver Creek was 5 miles behind her and Denver still 30 miles ahead. The sun was setting, temperature dropping by the minute. Nora's fingers had long since gone numb, her lips blue with cold. She knew the stories knew what happened to those caught in mountain blizzards without shelter. She stumbled forward, each step more difficult than the last, until her frozen feet betrayed her and she collapsed to her knees in the snow. The twins began to cry in earnest now, their hungry wails barely audible over the roaring wind. "Please God," Nora prayed, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Not my babies, take me if you must, but spare my children." As if in answer, a sound emerged from the howling storm, the steady clop of hooves and creak of wagon wheels. Nora lifted her head, certain her mind was playing tricks, conjuring salvation from desperation. But then a large silhouette materialized through the curtain of white, a covered wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses, and at the reins, a broad-shouldered figure. "Hello," Nora called, her voice cracking. "Help us, please." The wagon slowed, and the driver peered down at her, his face partially obscured by a thick scarf and wide-brimmed hat crusted with snow. For a terrible moment, Nora feared he would drive on, leaving them to their fate as the previous driver had done. Instead, he quickly secured the reins and jumped down into the snow. He was taller than any man Nora had ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to block the wind as he approached. "Madam," his deep voice rumbled as he knelt beside her, "what in God's name are you doing out here?" "The stage driver," Nora managed through chattering teeth, "said the babies would slow him down, just left us here." The man's eyes darkened with anger as he glanced from Nora to the twin infants clutched against her chest. Without another word, he shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Name's Dawson Reed," he said as he carefully lifted Nora to her feet. "Let's get you and those little ones out of this cold before you freeze solid." Nora's legs buckled, refusing to support her weight. Without hesitation, Dawson gathered her into his arms, careful not to crush the twins between them. He carried them to his wagon with long, determined strides, the wind howling its fury around them. The wagon bed was lined with furs and blankets, a small iron stove burning in one corner. Dawson gently placed Nora on a pile of pelts, then climbed in after her, securing the canvas flap against the storm. "Those babies need warming," he said, reaching for additional blankets. "And so do you." "How long were you out there?" "Hours," Nora whispered, her teeth still chattering violently. The driver, he just kept saying the road was too dangerous, that 3 passengers weren't worth the risk. Dawson's expression hardened as he tucked blankets around her and the twins. "Got a name to go with that yellow-bellied coward, Higgins. Thomas Higgins." Dawson nodded grimly. "I know the man, and I'll be having words with him when I return to Silver Creek." He stoked the small stove, adding another piece of wood. "But first, let's get you taken care of. Those little ones look hungry." Nora looked down at her twins, now fussing weakly against her. "They haven't eaten since morning. I don't know if I can." "I've got goat's milk," Dawson said, reaching for a small canteen. "It's not ideal, but it'll keep them going until we reach my cabin. It's only a few miles from here." As he warmed the milk and helped Nora feed her children, she studied her savior. Beneath the snow-crusted hat and scarf was a face weathered by sun and wind, but handsome in a rugged way. His beard was dark with flecks of auburn, trimmed close to his jaw. But it was his eyes that struck her most deep blue and gentle, at odds with his imposing size. "Why are you out in this storm, Mr. Reed?" Nora asked as Emma suckled eagerly at the makeshift bottle he'd fashioned. "Dawson," he corrected. "And I was heading back from delivering supplies to the Jenkins family. Their youngest took sick last week." He smiled faintly. "Lucky thing I was late getting started back, otherwise I might have missed you altogether." The thought sent a chill through Nora that had nothing to do with the cold. "Then I owe you my life and my children's." Dawson shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, madam." "Nora," she said softly. "Nora Winters." Once the babies were fed and bundled securely, Dawson returned to the driver's seat, guiding his team through the blinding snow with a confidence that amazed Nora. She held her twins close, watching the broad back of the man who had appeared like an angel in the midst of hell. An hour later, the wagon rolled to a stop, and Dawson helped Nora and her children into a sturdy log cabin nestled at the base of pine-covered hills. Inside, a fire roared in a stone hearth, casting the single-room dwelling in warm light. "It's not much," Dawson said as he carried in their belongings, "but it's warm and dry." Nora looked around at the simple but tidy home: a wooden table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, shelves lined with books and supplies, dried herbs hanging from the rafters. It was small, but compared to the frozen wilderness, it was paradise. "It's wonderful," she said sincerely. That night, Dawson insisted Nora take his bed while he slept on a pallet before the fire. As she drifted to sleep with her babies nestled beside her, Nora wondered what twist of fate had brought this kind stranger into their lives, and how long they would remain in his care before continuing their journey to Denver. She had no way of knowing that the blizzard raging outside would last for 7 days, trapping them in the cabin together, or that those 7 days would change the course of all their lives forever. By morning, the storm had intensified. Dawson stood at the window, frowning at the wall of white beyond the glass. "I've seen bad storms in my 15 years in these mountains," he said, "but this one's making a case for itself as the worst." Nora sat at the table, Emma in one arm, while she sipped the strong coffee Dawson had prepared. Elijah slept in a makeshift cradle, a wooden box lined with soft furs. "How long do you think it will last?" "Hard to say. Could be days." He turned to face her, his expression apologetic. "I'm afraid you might be stuck with me for a while, Mrs. Winters." "Nora," she reminded him. "And after what you did yesterday, I'm hardly going to complain about your hospitality." A hint of a smile lifted the corner of his mouth. "Well then, I'll do my best to be a good host." He moved to the fire, stirring a pot of oatmeal. "I imagine those little ones keep you plenty busy." Nora glanced down at Emma, whose tiny hand had wrapped around her finger. "They do, but they're good babies, quiet mostly, except when they're hungry." "How old are they?" 3 months next week." Her voice softened. "Their father never got to meet them. He died before they were born." Dawson nodded, his eyes filled with understanding rather than pity. "That's a heavy burden to carry alone." "It is," Nora admitted. "That's why I was heading to Denver. My sister Mary lives there with her husband. She said I could stay with them until I get on my feet." "Good to have family," Dawson said, spooning oatmeal into a bowl for her. "Mine's all back east. Haven't seen them in going on 12 years now." As they ate breakfast, Nora learned that Dawson had come west at 19, working cattle drives in Texas before moving north to Colorado. He'd built his cabin 5 years ago, making a living as a trapper, hunter, and occasional guide for wealthy Easterners who came to hunt in the mountains. "It's a solitary life," he admitted, "but I've got good neighbors within riding distance. The Jenkins family I mentioned, and old Samuel Potter, who runs the trading post about 4 miles east. We look out for each other." Throughout the day, Nora discovered that, despite his imposing size and quiet demeanor, Dawson was gentle and thoughtful. He fashioned a proper cradle for the twins from a large wooden chest, lining it with soft pelts and placing it near enough to the fire to keep them warm, but not so close as to be dangerous. When Elijah began to fuss after his midday feeding, Dawson surprised Nora by asking to hold him. She watched, amazed, as her son quieted immediately in the big man's arms. You've had practice with babies, she observed. Dawson smiled down at Elijah, who had wrapped his tiny hand around the man's finger. My sister Abigail had 4 little ones before I left home. I was old enough to help with the first 2. That night, as a fresh wave of snow blanketed the cabin, Nora fed the twins while Dawson prepared a stew of dried venison and root vegetables. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly how natural it felt to be sharing this space with him, as if they'd known each other far longer than a single day. Tell me about your husband, Dawson said as they ate, if you don't mind talking about him. Nora was surprised by the request but found she didn't mind. James was a schoolteacher. We met when I was 17. He came to our town in Pennsylvania to take over the schoolhouse. He was kind and smart, loved books. She smiled at the memory. We were married 3 years when he started coughing. The doctor in Denver said the mountain air might help his lungs, so we came west, but it was too late. I'm sorry, Dawson said sincerely. Sounds like he was a good man. He was. He would have been a wonderful father. Nora looked at her sleeping twins. When he died, I thought I might die too, but then these 2 came along and I had to keep going. Dawson nodded, understanding in his eyes. Life has a way of giving us reasons to carry on, even when we think we can't. What about you? Nora asked. You've never married? A shadow crossed his face. Almost. There was a woman in Denver about 4 years back. Margaret was her name. She was a widow with a young son. He stared into the fire. We were to be married that spring, but influenza took them both the winter before. I'm so sorry, Nora whispered, reaching across the table to touch his hand before she could think better of it. Dawson glanced down at her fingers resting on his, then gave her a sad smile. Like you said, you keep going, find reasons to get up each morning. They fell silent then, the crackling fire and howling wind the only sounds in the cabin. But in that silence was a shared understanding, a recognition of similar wounds that somehow made Nora feel less alone than she had in months. The next day brought no break in the storm. Dawson ventured out briefly to check on his livestock: 2 horses, 3 goats, and a small flock of chickens housed in a sturdy barn attached to the cabin by a covered walkway. He returned with fresh milk and eggs, his beard and eyebrows frosted white. If this keeps up, we'll need to ration some, he said, stamping snow from his boots. But we've got enough dried meat and preserves to last a few weeks if need be. Nora felt a stab of guilt. We're eating your winter stores. Don't worry about that, Dawson said firmly. I always put up more than I need, just in case, and those little ones need proper nourishment. As the day progressed, they fell into an easy routine. Nora tended to the twins while Dawson took care of the livestock and kept the fire burning. When the babies napped, she insisted on helping with other tasks, mending a torn shirt, preparing vegetables for their evening meal. That afternoon, Dawson pulled a worn deck of cards from a shelf. Know how to play gin rummy, Nora smiled. James taught me. I warn you, I'm rather good. Dawson's eyebrows rose in challenge. We'll see about that, Mrs. Winters. They played for hours, the competition fierce but friendly. Nora won 3 games to Dawson's 2, much to his chagrin. I demand a rematch tomorrow, he said with mock seriousness. My reputation as Silver Creek's card champion is at stake. Nora laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd experienced since James died. The sound seemed to brighten the cabin, and Dawson's smile in response warmed something inside her that had been cold for too long. That night, as she nursed the twins before bed, Nora found herself studying Dawson as he read by the fire. His large hands held the book carefully, turning pages with a gentleness that belied their strength. She wondered what it would be like to be held by those hands, to be the focus of the careful attention he gave to everything he touched. The thought startled her, and she quickly looked away when he glanced up, afraid he might somehow read her inappropriate musings on her face. It was simply gratitude she was feeling, Nora told herself. Gratitude and the natural intimacy that came from being confined together in a small space. Nothing more. By the 4th day of the storm, Nora and Dawson had settled into a comfortable companionship. They took turns reading aloud from Dawson's collection of books, everything from practical guides on animal husbandry to well-worn copies of Shakespeare and Dickens that had survived his journey west. "James would have loved your library," Nora commented as she ran her fingers over the spines. "He always said books were windows to worlds we might never see otherwise." "Smart man," Dawson replied. "These have been good company on long winter nights." He hesitated, then added, "Though I must say, having actual company is a pleasant change." The way he looked at her when he said it sent a flutter through Nora's chest. She busied herself with Emma, who was awake and gurgling happily in her cradle, to hide the blush she felt rising to her cheeks. That evening, as they sat before the fire after dinner, Elijah began to cry a pained wail unlike his usual hungry fussing. Nora checked him over, finding nothing obviously wrong, but his cries only intensified. "Could be colic," Dawson suggested. "My niece Sophia had it something terrible. Cried for hours every night. James's mother mentioned it, but the twins haven't shown signs before," Nora said worriedly, bouncing Elijah gently as he screamed. "What did your sister do for it?" She'd walk with Sophia, patting her back. Sometimes it helped to lay her on her stomach across Abigail's knees. He stood, holding out his arms. "Here, let me try." Nora hesitated only briefly before passing Elijah to him. Dawson cradled the infant against his chest, one large hand supporting his head, the other patting his back in a gentle rhythm as he paced the cabin floor. "There now, little man," he murmured. "What's got you so worked up, HM? Your mama's worried about you." To Nora's amazement, Elijah's cries began to soften. Within minutes, he was hiccuping quietly against Dawson's shoulder. "How did you do that?" she asked, astonished. Dawson smiled, continuing to pat the baby's back gently. "My sister always said I had the magic touch. Truth is, I think little ones just like the sound of a deep voice. Feels safe to them, maybe." He continued pacing, speaking softly to Elijah until the baby's eyes began to droop. Only when he was soundly asleep did Dawson carefully return him to the cradle beside his sister. "Thank you," Nora said sincerely. "You're very good with them." Dawson shrugged, but she could see he was pleased by the compliment. "They're easy to be good with. Fine little ones you've got." "They seem to like you," Nora observed. "Especially Elijah. He's usually more fussy with strangers." "Well, I don't reckon we're strangers anymore, are we?" Dawson's gaze held hers, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that in just 4 days they had developed a connection that defied the brevity of their acquaintance. Later that night, as Nora drifted toward sleep, she found herself thinking of James, of his kind smile and gentle hands, so different from Dawson's weathered strength. For the first time, the memory didn't bring overwhelming grief. Instead, she felt a quiet gratitude for the love they had shared, and an unexpected peace at the realization that her heart might someday have room for more than memories. On the 5th day, the storm finally began to abate. The howling wind decreased to a whisper, and occasional breaks in the clouds allowed weak sunlight to filter through. Dawson ventured outside to assess the damage and clear paths to the barn and woodpile. "Road will be impassable for at least another week," he reported when he returned, shedding his snow-covered coat. "Drifts are higher than my head in some places." Nora nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. She knew she should be eager to continue her journey to Denver, to the security her sister had promised. Yet the thought of leaving the cabin, leaving Dawson, filled her with an unexpected reluctance. "I hope Mary isn't too worried," she said, focusing on practical concerns. "She was expecting us days ago. Once the weather clears enough, I can ride into Silver Creek and send a telegram," Dawson offered. "Let her know you're safe." "Would you?" Nora asked gratefully. "I'd hate for her to think the worst, of course." He hesitated, then added, "And when the road is clear, I'll take you to Denver myself. That wagon of Higgins's wasn't fit for winter travel with babies, even if the man hadn't been a coward." The offer warmed Nora, though she tried to object. "I couldn't ask you to make such a journey. It's at least 3 days' travel in good conditions. You didn't ask, I offered." His tone brooked no argument. "Besides, I need supplies from Denver, been putting off the trip, but now I've got good reason to go." That evening, Dawson taught Nora how to play chess on a set he'd carved himself. The pieces were simple but beautifully crafted, each one unique. "This is exquisite work," Nora said, running her finger over a knight shaped like a rearing horse. "You're very talented." Dawson looked pleased but embarrassed by the praise. "Keeps my hands busy during long winter nights." "I'm working on a set for the Jenkins children now." He arranged the pieces on the board. "Have you played before?" "James tried to teach me once, but I never quite grasped the strategy. It's all about thinking ahead, seeing possibilities before they unfold." He moved a pawn forward. "Like life that way, I suppose." As they played, Dawson patiently explained each move, praising her good decisions and gently pointing out alternatives when she made mistakes. His teaching style reminded her of James, in some ways encouraging without being condescending, yet there was something distinctly different about Dawson's approach. Where James had been theoretical, Dawson was practical, relating chess strategies to real-life situations he'd encountered. "This bishop here," he explained, "he's like a hunter tracking elk through the forest. Can move far, but only on certain paths. Have to use him wisely, or he'll end up isolated, no good to anyone." Nora lost the game, but felt she'd understood more about chess, and perhaps about Dawson himself, than she had expected to. As they put the pieces away, their hands brushed, sending a jolt of awareness through Nora that had nothing to do with the static electricity of the dry winter air. She withdrew her hand quickly, but not before noticing the way Dawson's breath caught slightly at the contact. "Thank you for the lesson," she said, her voice not quite steady. "My pleasure." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "You're a quick study, Nora." The way he said her name, soft but deep, like distant thunder on a summer afternoon, made her pulse quicken. To hide her reaction, she rose to check on the twins, though she'd just fed them an hour before. That night, sleep eluded her. Nora lay awake, listening to Dawson's steady breathing from his pallet by the fire, wondering what it meant that a man she'd known less than a week could stir feelings she'd thought buried with her husband. Is it disloyal to James, she wondered, to feel this way? Or would he want me to find happiness again for myself and our children? The questions followed her into uneasy dreams where James and Dawson stood on either side of a wide river, both reaching for her, neither able to cross. The sixth day dawned clear and cold, the storm finally spent. Sunlight reflected blindingly off the pristine snow, transforming the world outside the cabin into a glittering white kingdom. "Good Lord," Nora breathed, standing at the window with Emma in her arms. "I've never seen anything so beautiful." Dawson came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Sight like that makes the storm worth enduring, doesn't it?" Nora glanced up at him, struck by his profile outlined against the brilliant light, the strong jaw, straight nose, eyes crinkled at the corners as he surveyed the transformed landscape. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, it does." After breakfast, Dawson announced he would try to make it to the trading post to check on Samuel Potter and send someone to Silver Creek with a message for Nora's sister. "It's only 4 miles, he said as he pulled on his heavy coat and boots. "Should be back by nightfall, barring any trouble. There's plenty of wood stacked by the fire and stew left from last night." Nora felt a disproportionate anxiety at the thought of him leaving, even for a few hours. "Please be careful, the snow must be terribly deep." "I'll take the snowshoes," he assured her, pointing to 2 pairs of wooden frames hanging on the wall. "And Brutus knows these trails better than any horse I've ever had." Before he left, Dawson showed Nora where he kept his rifle and how to use it if necessary. "Not that you'll need it," he added quickly. "No one's likely to come calling in this snow, and any predators are hunkered down same as people, but just in case." Nora nodded, taking the weapon with steady hands. James had taught her to shoot years ago, though she'd rarely had occasion to use the skill. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "The twins and I will be here waiting when you return." Something flickered in Dawson's eyes at her words, a warmth that made her breath catch. For a moment she thought he might say something more, might even step forward but then he nodded, pulled on his hat, and was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Alone for the first time in nearly a week, Nora found the cabin strangely empty despite the presence of her babies. She kept busy feeding the twins, tidying the already neat space, preparing vegetables for dinner, but her eyes returned to the window often, searching the white expanse for signs of Dawson's return. By late afternoon, with the light beginning to fade, Nora's worry grew. The twins were unusually fussy, as if sensing her anxiety. She paced the cabin, singing softly to soothe them and herself while watching the horizon for movement. Just as dusk was settling, turning the brilliant white to murky blue, she spotted him, a dark figure trudging through the snow, leading his horse behind him. Relief flooded through her, so intense she felt weak with it. When Dawson stepped through the door, his beard crusted with ice and cheeks red with cold, Nora very nearly embraced him. She restrained herself but couldn't hide the joy in her voice. "Thank goodness. I was beginning to worry." Dawson smiled tiredly as he removed his snow-covered outer garments. "Trail was rougher than I expected. Poor Brutus got stuck in a drift about a mile back, had to dig him out." He rubbed his gloved hands together. "But I made it to the trading post. Sam's fine, though his roof took some damage in the storm. Were you able to send word to my sister?" Dawson nodded, warming his hands by the fire. "Sam's son is riding to Silver Creek tomorrow. He'll telegraph Denver from there. Your sister will know you're safe by the day after." "Thank you," Nora said sincerely. "That's a weight off my mind." After warming himself, Dawson produced a small bundle from his coat pocket. "Sam's wife sent these for the twins, said every baby needs something pretty, even in the wilderness." Inside the bundle were 2 tiny knitted caps, one blue, one pink, and a pair of matching blankets, soft and colorful against the cabin's rustic interior. "Oh," Nora breathed, running her fingers over the delicate stitches. "They're beautiful. Please thank her for me when you see her next." "You can thank her yourself," Dawson said. "She insisted you and the babies come for dinner once the trails are clearer, said it's been too long since she had another woman to talk to." The invitation touched Nora deeply. It was the first time since James's death that she'd been included in someone's social circle, rather than being an object of pity or charity. "I'd like that very much," she said, then hesitated. "Though I'm not sure how long we'll be staying, once the road to Denver clears." She trailed off, realizing she didn't want to finish the thought. The prospect of saying goodbye to Dawson and this cabin that had become a sanctuary filled her with an unexpected sorrow. Dawson's expression was unreadable as he nodded. "Of course. But the invitation stands as long as you're here." That night, they ate the stew Nora had prepared, supplemented with fresh bread Dawson had brought from the trading post. As they ate, he told her about Samuel Potter and his wife Hannah, who had come west 20 years earlier and built the trading post from nothing. "They're good people," Dawson said. "The kind who'd give you their last cup of flour if you needed it. They've been like family to me since I settled here." "You've built a good life," Nora observed. "Far from your blood kin, but with people who care for you." Dawson considered this, nodding slowly. "I suppose I have, though there are times I miss having." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "A more complete home. What would make it complete?" Nora asked softly. His eyes met hers across the table, holding her gaze with an intensity that made her heart race. "The things most men want, I expect. A wife, children. The knowledge that I'm building something that will outlast me." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. Nora found herself unable to look away, drawn to the quiet longing in his expression, a longing that echoed her own emerging feelings. The moment was broken when Elijah began to cry, hungry for his evening feeding. Nora rose quickly, grateful for the distraction that allowed her to compose herself. As she nursed her son, she watched Dawson from beneath lowered lashes. He had taken up a piece of wood and his carving knife, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy as he shaped the material. The domesticity of the scene struck her again, how natural it felt to be here with him, as if the cabin had been waiting for her and the twins to make it complete. But Denver awaited them. Mary and her husband had already arranged a position for Nora as a seamstress in a dress shop. There would be a future there, security for her children, the support of family. Yet as she looked at Dawson's bent head, his expression peaceful as he worked, Nora wondered if security and support were all she wanted for her future. Or if perhaps, after months of merely surviving, she might dare to hope for happiness as well. The seventh day of their stay dawned bright and clear, the temperature rising enough to start a slow melt of the massive snowdrifts. Dawson announced at breakfast that if the weather held, the road to Silver Creek might be passable in another 3 days, and from there to Denver. Nora asked, trying to keep her voice neutral, "A week, maybe less if the stage is running." He glanced at her. "Unless you'd rather wait longer, no need to rush if you're worried about traveling with the babies." Was he offering her an excuse to stay? Nora wasn't sure, but the thought that he might want her to remain sent a flutter of hope through her chest. "I should let Mary know when to expect us," she said carefully, "but I'm in no hurry to leave." She busied herself with wiping Emma's mouth after her feeding. "You've made us so comfortable here." A smile tugged at the corner of Dawson's mouth. "Glad to hear it. I've grown rather accustomed to the company." After breakfast, Dawson went out to clear more of the path to the barn. Through the window, Nora watched him work, his powerful shoulders and back evident even through his heavy coat as he shoveled snow. There was something deeply appealing about his capability, the quiet competence with which he approached every task. When he returned, cheeks ruddy from exertion and cold, Nora had coffee waiting. He accepted the cup gratefully, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. "I was thinking," he said after a long sip, "there's an old chest in the storage room with some of my mother's things. Might be some baby clothes that would fit the twins. She sent a trunk of family items when I built this place, said a home needed history, even a new one." Nora followed him to a small adjoining room she hadn't entered before. It was lined with shelves holding supplies and tools, and against one wall stood several wooden chests. Dawson knelt before one, lifting the lid carefully. Inside were neatly folded linens, a few books, and what looked like a family Bible. Beneath these was a smaller box, which Dawson removed and opened. It contained tiny garments yellowed with age but beautifully made, with delicate embroidery around the collars and cuffs. "These were mine and my siblings," he explained, holding up a small gown. "Mother couldn't bear to part with them even when we were grown, said she was saving them for grandchildren." "They're beautiful," Nora said, touching the fine fabric. "Are you certain you want to use them? They're family heirlooms." Dawson's gaze was steady as he replied, "They were made to be worn, not stored away in a box. I think Mother would be pleased to know they're keeping little ones warm again." The simple statement held layers of meaning that Nora wasn't ready to examine too closely. Instead, she accepted the clothes with a grateful nod. "Thank you. This is very kind." As she turned to leave, her eye caught something else in the chest, a framed daguerreotype partially visible beneath a folded quilt. Dawson noticed her glance and pulled it out. "My family, just before I left for the West," he explained, handing her the frame. The image showed a handsome couple surrounded by 5 children of varying ages. Nora immediately spotted Dawson younger, clean-shaven, but unmistakable with his height and strong features. He stood behind a seated young woman who held an infant in her arms. "Your parents look very distinguished," Nora observed. "And is this your sister Abigail with her baby?" Dawson nodded, a fond smile softening his face. "That's little Sophia, the colicky one I told you about. She'd be nearly 13 now." His finger traced the other figures. "That's Robert, my older brother, and the 2 younger boys are Thomas and William. You must miss them terribly," Nora said softly. A shadow crossed Dawson's face. "I do. We write, but it's not the same as being there, watching the young ones grow up." He carefully returned the photograph to the chest. "I keep meaning to visit, but something always needs doing here. The years slip by faster than you'd think. Why did you leave?" The question slipped out before Nora could consider whether it was too personal. Dawson didn't seem to mind. "Restlessness, I suppose. Father expected Robert and me to join him in the family shipping business. Robert was suited for it, good head for numbers, enjoyed the work. I found it suffocating." He closed the chest, running his hand over the smooth wood. "There was a girl, too. Father had practically arranged our marriage, daughter of his business partner. She was pleasant enough, but neither of us had any say in the matter. So you came west instead. Ran away, more like, Dawson admitted with a rueful smile. Not my proudest moment, but I couldn't see another way out. Wrote to them once I reached St. Louis, then again when I settled here. He stood, brushing dust from his knees. They didn't understand at first, but they've come to accept it. Mother still ends every letter asking when I'm coming home for a visit. Perhaps you should, Nora suggested. When spring comes, Dawson's eyes met hers, and for a moment she thought she saw something like hope in their blue depths. Perhaps, though I'd have reason to return quickly. The words hung between them, laden with possibilities neither was quite ready to voice. Nora clutched the baby clothes to her chest, suddenly needing space to collect her thoughts. I should try these on the twins, she said, her voice not quite steady, see if they fit. Dawson nodded, allowing her the retreat. I'll start on dinner. Thought I'd make flapjacks my specialty. That evening, the twins wore their new clothes, Elijah in a tiny shirt and trousers that had once been Dawson's, Emma in a delicate gown that had belonged to one of his sisters. Seeing her babies dressed in garments with such history filled Nora with a strange emotion, part gratitude, part something deeper she wasn't ready to name. After the twins were settled for the night, Dawson surprised her by pulling a fiddle from beneath his bed. Thought a little music might be nice, he said almost shyly. If you don't mind, I'd love it, Nora replied honestly. James couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but he did love music. Dawson settled in his chair by the fire and began to play a slow, sweet melody that filled the cabin with warmth. His large fingers moved deftly over the strings, coaxing out notes that spoke of longing and hope. Nora sat transfixed, watching his face as he played, eyes half closed in concentration. When the song ended, she sighed softly. That was beautiful. Where did you learn to play like that? My grandfather taught me, Dawson said, running his fingers lovingly over the instrument's worn wood. This was his fiddle. He said music was a way to speak when words failed. He was a wise man. Nora hesitated, then asked, would you play another? Dawson's smile warmed her more than the fire. For you, gladly. He played for nearly an hour lively reels that made Nora's toes tap, haunting ballads that brought tears to her eyes. And finally, a gentle lullaby that seemed to enfold the cabin and its occupants in a cocoon of peace. When he finished, the silence that fell between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Nora found herself wishing the moment could stretch indefinitely, this quiet evening with the snow outside, the fire crackling, and Dawson's steady presence across from her. Thank you, she said softly. That was a gift I didn't know I needed. Dawson set the fiddle aside, his expression serious. Nora, there's something I've been meaning to say, but whatever he intended to tell her was interrupted by a sudden cry from Elijah, followed quickly by Emma joining her brother in a duet of discontent. Nora rose automatically, the moment broken. I should feed them, she said, moving to the cradle. They'll settle faster if they're not hungry. Dawson nodded, though she thought she detected disappointment in his eyes. Of course, it's getting late anyway. As Nora tended to her children, she wondered what Dawson had been about to say and whether he would find the courage to say it again before they parted ways. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of activity as Dawson prepared for their journey. He repaired his larger wagon, checking every wheel and board to ensure it would carry them safely to Denver. He fashioned a covered shelter in the wagon bed, lined with furs and blankets to protect Nora and the twins from the cold. Nora, meanwhile, washed and mended their clothes, packed the few possessions she had brought with her, and tried not to think about saying goodbye to the cabin that had become a sanctuary. Or to the man who had saved their lives, and she was beginning to realize her heart as well. On the evening before their planned departure, Dawson returned from checking the trail to Silver Creek with news that the road was finally clear enough for travel. We can leave after breakfast tomorrow, he said as he hung his coat by the door. Should reach town by midday, spend the night there, then start for Denver the following morning. Nora nodded, unable to summon enthusiasm for the journey she had been so desperate to make just days ago. That's good news, she said, her voice not quite convincing. Dawson studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "Unless you'd rather wait a bit longer, no rush, as I said before." Hope flared in Nora's chest, but she tamped it down. She couldn't impose on his kindness indefinitely, not without some indication that he wanted her to stay for reasons beyond charity. "My sister will be worried," she said reluctantly, "and I shouldn't take advantage of your hospitality any longer than necessary." Something like disappointment flickered across Dawson's face, but he nodded. "Of course, I understand." After a subdued dinner, Dawson surprised her by retrieving a small wooden box from the storage room. "I've been working on these," he said, seeming almost nervous as he handed it to her. "Thought the twins might like them when they're a bit older." Inside the box were two exquisitely carved animals, a deer for Emma and a bear for Elijah, each small enough to fit in a child's hand but detailed with remarkable craftsmanship. "Dawson," Nora breathed, touching the smooth wood. "These are wonderful. When did you find time to make them?" "While you were sleeping," he admitted. "I wanted them to have something to remember." He trailed off, then finished, "Something from the mountains." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, we won't forget." The words felt inadequate for what she really wanted to say, that she couldn't imagine forgetting a moment of their time together. That the thought of leaving him behind in this cabin made her chest ache with a pain she hadn't felt since James died. Dawson seemed about to speak, then shook his head slightly. "I should check the wagon one more time before dark," he said, rising abruptly. "Make sure everything's ready for morning." When he had gone, Nora held the carved animals to her chest, finally allowing her tears to fall. She had known this man for barely more than a week, yet the thought of parting from him felt like losing a piece of herself. How was it possible to form such a deep connection in so short a time? And was she betraying James's memory by feeling this way about another man? As if in answer, Emma cooed softly from her cradle, reaching tiny hands toward her mother. Nora lifted her daughter, brushing a kiss against her downy head. "What should I do, little one?" she whispered. "My heart is so confused." Emma only gurgled in response, but as Nora held her child, this precious gift that James had given her before he left, she felt a sense of clarity begin to emerge. James had loved her, had wanted her to be happy. Would he want her to deny herself a chance at love again, to deny her children a father who would cherish them? When Dawson returned, Nora had made her decision. She would go to Denver as planned, fulfill her promise to visit her sister. But before they left, she would find the courage to speak what was in her heart. Even if Dawson didn't share her feelings, she wouldn't leave without at least giving voice to the connection that had grown between them. But as evening deepened into night, the opportunity never seemed to present itself. Dawson was quieter than usual, focused on preparations for their journey. When they finally retired Nora to the bed, Dawson to his pallet by the fire, the words remained unspoken between them. Morning came too quickly, pale light filtering through the cabin windows as Nora fed the twins one last time before their departure. Dawson loaded their few belongings into the wagon, his movements efficient but subdued. When everything was ready, Nora stood in the middle of the cabin, taking a final look at the space that had sheltered them from the storm, both the literal blizzard and the metaphorical one that had engulfed her life since James's death. "Ready?" Dawson asked softly from the doorway. Nora turned to him, her heart in her throat. "Dawson, but before she could continue, the sound of approaching horses interrupted her. Dawson frowned, moving to the window. "Riders coming," he said, reaching for his rifle out of habit. "3 of them." Nora joined him at the window, peering out at the approaching figures. As they drew closer, she gasped in recognition. "That's Thomas Higgins," she said, identifying the man in the lead. "The driver who abandoned us in the storm." Dawson's expression hardened. What business could he have here? They soon found out. As the 3 men dismounted in front of the cabin, Higgins called out, "Reed, you in there? Got a message from Denver." Dawson opened the door, positioning himself in the doorway so the men couldn't enter. "What kind of message requires 3 riders?" Higgins, a thin man with a perpetually sour expression, shifted uncomfortably under Dawson's gaze. "Mrs. Winters' sister sent us. Been looking for her since the storm broke. Her brother-in-law's offering a reward for her safe return." Is that so? Dawson's voice was dangerously calm. Strange that you'd be so eager to find her now, Higgins, when you were quick enough to abandon her and her babies in a blizzard. Higgins had the grace to look ashamed. Made a mistake there, weather was worse than I expected, figured they'd turn back to town. You left them to die, Dawson said flatly. If I hadn't come along when I did, they would have frozen to death because of your cowardice. One of the other men younger, with an open face that suggested honesty, stepped forward. Sir, we truly are here on behalf of Mrs. Nathan Cooper of Denver. She's frantic about her sister and the babies. When your message reached her saying they were safe but stranded, she sent us to escort them home. Nora moved to stand beside Dawson. My sister sent you specifically, the young man nodded. Yes, madam. I'm Jacob Wells, work for your brother-in-law's freight company. He personally asked me to bring you safely to Denver. He glanced at Higgins. Mr. Higgins knew the way to Mr. Reed's cabin, so he guided us here. Dawson's posture remained rigid, but some of the tension left his face at the young man's explanation. We were just preparing to leave for Denver ourselves, he said. Mrs. Winters and her children will travel in my wagon where they'll be warm and protected. Higgins started to object, but Dawson's cold stare silenced him. The third man, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. That sounds sensible, Mr. Reed. We'll ride alongside as additional protection. The roads are clear enough, but there's always risk this time of year. Nora looked between Dawson and the riders, her earlier resolve to speak her heart fading in the face of this new development. Her sister had sent for her, was worried enough to offer a reward for her safe return. How could she now suggest delaying their journey or hint at the feelings that had developed for Dawson? I should finish getting the twins ready, she said quietly, retreating into the cabin. Dawson followed her after instructing the men to water their horses. Nora, he said softly. You were about to say something before they arrived. She busied herself with wrapping Emma in a blanket, avoiding his gaze. It was nothing important, just thank you for everything you've done for us. Dawson was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. You're welcome. I'm glad I could help. The journey to Silver Creek passed in relative silence. Nora rode in the wagon with the twins, protected from the cold by the shelter Dawson had built. He drove with focused attention, exchanging few words with the riders who flanked them. By midday, they reached the small frontier town, a single street lined with wooden buildings, the most prominent being the general store and saloon. People stared as they passed, word of Nora's rescue having spread throughout the community. They stopped at the town's only hotel, a modest two-story building with a restaurant on the ground floor. As Dawson helped Nora down from the wagon, an older woman hurried out to meet them. Mrs. Winters, she exclaimed, thank the Lord you're safe. We've all been so worried since we heard what happened. Nora recognized her as Mrs. Thornton, the hotel owner's wife, whom she had met briefly on her journey to Silver Creek before the storm. Mr. Reed found us just in time, Nora said, glancing at Dawson with gratitude. We owe him our lives. Mrs. Thornton nodded vigorously. A true hero, our Mr. Reed, always helping folks in need. She turned to Dawson with a warm smile. Your usual room is ready, Dawson, and I've prepared the large corner room for Mrs. Winters and her little ones warmest in the house. As they settled into the hotel, Nora was struck by the respect everyone in town showed Dawson. From the stable boy who took his horses to the shopkeeper who insisted he take extra supplies for the journey on the house. It was clear he was highly regarded by the community. You're something of a local hero, Nora observed as they sat down to dinner in the hotel restaurant. The twins were sleeping peacefully in a cradle Mrs. Thornton had provided, and the riders had gone to the saloon, giving them a rare moment alone. Dawson looked embarrassed. Folks here are generous with their praise, that's all. I've done nothing any decent man wouldn't do. I disagree, Nora said softly. What you did for us taking in strangers, sharing your home and provisions, treating my children as if they were precious to you, that goes beyond decency, Dawson. It speaks to the quality of your character. He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. They are precious, he said simply, and so is their mother. Nora's heart fluttered at his words, but before she could respond, Jacob Wells approached their table. "Pardon the interruption," he said, "but I've just received word that the stage to Denver will be leaving tomorrow at noon. If we're to travel with it, we should be ready by 11. Dawson frowned. "I thought we were traveling in my wagon." Jacob looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Cooper was specific in his instructions, sir. He paid for stage passage for his sister-in-law and the children. Said it would be faster and safer than a private wagon." "I see." Dawson's expression was carefully neutral, but Nora could see the tension in his jaw. "And what about Mrs. Winters's belongings?" "The stage has room for her trunk, sir. Mr. Cooper said anything else could be sent for later." After Jacob left, an awkward silence fell between them. Nora's earlier resolve to speak her heart seemed impossible now, with their journey together cut short and her sister's expectations hanging over her. "Dawson," she began hesitantly, "I'm sorry about this. Mary's husband can be particular about how things are done. I'm sure he means well." "Of course," Dawson said, his voice oddly formal. "The stage is faster. You'll be with your sister sooner." "But what about you? Will you return to your cabin?" He nodded, not quite meeting her eyes. "Eventually. Need to replenish some supplies first. Might stay in town a few days." The conversation turned to practicalities, what time they should meet in the morning, which of Nora's things should go on the stage. The easy companionship they had shared in the cabin seemed to have evaporated, replaced by a polite distance that ached more than Nora could have imagined. That night, alone in her hotel room with her sleeping babies, Nora stared at the ceiling, tears sliding silently down her temples into her hair. Tomorrow she would leave for Denver, to the security her sister had promised. She would build a new life there, find work, raise her children. And she would never see Dawson Reed again. The thought brought a fresh wave of tears. In just over a week, this man had become more important to her than she had believed possible. He had saved not just her life, but something inside her that had been slowly dying since James's death, her capacity for joy, for hope, for seeing beyond mere survival to the possibility of happiness. By morning, Nora's eyes were swollen from crying, but she had made her decision. She dressed with care in her best dress, the one she had worn for James's funeral, now the only decent garment she owned, and packed her few belongings into the small trunk that would accompany them on the stage. When she descended to the hotel lobby with the twins, Dawson was already waiting. He looked as if he hadn't slept either, his eyes shadowed beneath his hat. "Good morning," he said formally. "I hope you slept well." "Not particularly," Nora admitted. "And you?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "About the same, Mrs. Thornton bustled over with coffee and fresh biscuits, insisting they eat before the stage arrived. "Going to be a long journey to Denver," she said. "Best not to start it hungry." They ate in relative silence, interrupted only by Mrs. Thornton's cheerful chatter and the occasional gurgle from the twins, who were unusually content that morning, as if sensing the importance of the day. As the hour of departure approached, the lobby filled with people coming to see them off. Word of Nora's rescue had made her something of a local celebrity, and it seemed half the town wanted to wish her well on her journey. Through it all, Dawson remained by her side, quiet but attentive, carrying Emma while Nora held Elijah. To anyone watching, they might have appeared to be a family, a thought that brought both joy and pain to Nora's heart. When the stage was announced, the crowd moved outside to where the impressive vehicle waited, its 4 horses stamping impatiently in the snow. Jacob Wells supervised the loading of Nora's trunk, then turned to her with a smile. "All ready, Mrs. Winters. We've got the best seats saved for you and the little ones." Nora nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She turned to Dawson, who was carefully handing Emma to Mrs. Thornton so she could board the stage. "Dawson," she began, but the words she wanted to say caught in her throat. His eyes met hers, filled with an emotion that mirrored her own. "Nora, stage is leaving in 5 minutes," the driver called, interrupting whatever Dawson had been about to say. Mrs. Thornton returned Emma to Nora's arms, and suddenly it was time. With a final, desperate look at Dawson, Nora turned toward the stage, where Jacob waited to help her board. She had taken only 2 steps when Dawson's voice stopped her. "Wait." Nora turned back, hope flaring in her chest at the determination in his tone. Dawson stepped forward, oblivious to the curious onlookers. "Don't go," he said simply. "What?" Nora whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Don't go to Denver," Dawson said, his voice stronger now. "Stay here, stay with me." The crowd around them fell silent, sensing the gravity of the moment. Even the twins seemed to understand, quieting in Nora's arms. "Dawson," she breathed, "what are you saying?" He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly as he reached for hers. "I'm saying that in 1 week, you've become more important to me than anything has been in years," he said, his deep voice steady despite his evident nerves. "I'm saying that the thought of you and these little ones leaving feels like losing a part of myself I didn't know was missing until you found it." Tears filled Nora's eyes, but she made no move to wipe them away. "We've known each other such a short time," she whispered. "Some people search their whole lives and never find what we discovered in a week," Dawson countered. "I know it's sudden, I know you have plans and your sister is expecting you, but I'm asking you to consider another path." He took a deep breath. "Stay in Silver Creek, let me court you properly. Give us a chance to see if what I feel, what I hope you feel too, is as real as I believe it is." A murmur ran through the crowd, but Nora barely noticed. All she could see was Dawson's face, open and vulnerable in a way she had never witnessed before. "And if it is," she asked softly, "what then?" A smile broke across his face like sunrise over the mountains. "Then I'd ask you to marry me, Nora Winters, to make a home with me, not just the cabin, though that's waiting whenever you're ready, but a real home with love and laughter and family." Nora's heart felt too large for her chest, filled with a joy so intense it was almost painful. "And my children, I already love them," Dawson said simply. "I've thought of them as mine since the moment I lifted them from the snow." A sob escaped Nora, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming happiness. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes, Dawson, we'll stay." The crowd erupted in cheers as Dawson gathered her and the twins into his arms, mindful of the babies between them. His lips found hers in a kiss that felt like coming home, gentle yet passionate, filled with promise and possibility. When they finally broke apart, Mrs. Thornton was wiping tears from her eyes, and even the stage driver looked moved by the scene. "Well," Jacob Wells said with a broad smile, "I guess I'll be taking a different message to Denver than expected." The stage departed an hour later, carrying Jacob and a letter from Nora to her sister, explaining her decision and promising to visit Denver in the spring. Higgins and the third rider went with it, leaving Nora, Dawson, and the twins standing in the street as the vehicle disappeared around a bend. "No regrets?" Dawson asked softly, his arm around her waist. Nora looked up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. "None," she said honestly. "This feels right, Dawson, like it was meant to be." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "From the moment I found you in that snow, I felt something I couldn't explain. Like Providence had led me there for a reason greater than just saving 3 lives. To save 4, Nora said softly, because I think you've saved mine in more ways than one." They walked back to the hotel where Mrs. Thornton insisted they stay as her guests until proper arrangements could be made. That evening, as the twins slept peacefully in their borrowed cradle, Nora and Dawson sat before the fire in the hotel's private parlor, making plans for their future. "I was thinking," Dawson said, his fingers intertwined with hers, "the cabin's a good start, but it's small for a family. Come spring, I could add rooms, a proper bedroom for us, a nursery for the twins." Nora smiled at his enthusiasm. "I'd like that, and perhaps a garden." "I've always wanted to grow vegetables and flowers." "Anything you want," he promised. "The land is good for growing. Samuel's wife has the finest garden in the county. She'd be happy to help you get started." As they talked, Nora marveled at how natural it felt to plan a life with this man she had known for only days. Yet it didn't feel rushed or impulsive, rather, it felt like the most right decision she had ever made. "What will your family think?" she asked suddenly. "Your parents, your siblings. Will they approve of you marrying a widow with children?" Dawson smiled. They'll be overjoyed that I'm finally settling down. Mother's been sending not-so-subtle hints for years." His expression grew serious. "But more importantly, they'll love you, Nora, and the twins. How could they not?" The conviction in his voice warmed her heart. "I hope you're right. I want them to know Emma and Elijah to be part of their lives, even from a distance." "We'll visit," Dawson promised, "and they'll come here. My sister Abigail has threatened for years to bring her brood west to see where her wild brother ended up." The idea of building connections between their past and future brought tears to Nora's eyes. "James would have liked you," she said softly. "He always said the measure of a man was in his kindness, not his strength. You have both in abundance." Dawson's hand tightened around hers. "I wish I could have known him. Any man who was loved by you must have been exceptional." "He was," Nora agreed, "and he would want me to be happy." "To find love again. And have you?" Dawson asked, a vulnerability in his voice that touched her deeply. "Found love again?" Nora raised her free hand to his cheek, feeling the roughness of his beard beneath her palm. "I have," she said simply. "With a man who lifted me and my children from the snow and into his life without hesitation. A man who showed me that even after great loss, the heart can heal and grow larger than before." Dawson's eyes shone with emotion as he leaned forward to kiss her, a kiss filled with tenderness and promise, sealing the commitment they had made to build a future together. 3 months later, on a bright spring day with wildflowers blooming across the hillsides, Nora Winters became Nora Reed in a ceremony performed in the town square of Silver Creek. Emma and Elijah, now 6 months old and thriving, watched from the arms of Mrs. Thornton and Hannah Potter as their mother pledged her life and love to the man who had saved them all. The entire town turned out for the celebration, along with Dawson's family, who had made the journey west upon receiving news of the engagement. His mother, a dignified woman with Dawson's blue eyes, had wept upon meeting Nora and the twins. "My son wrote that Providence had sent him a family," she said, embracing Nora warmly. "Now I see he wasn't exaggerating." Nora's sister, Mary, and her husband Nathan had come as well, bringing gifts and apologies for their high-handed attempts to direct Nora's life. After meeting Dawson and seeing the joy in Nora's eyes, even Nathan had to admit that her decision to remain in Silver Creek had been the right one. As Dawson slipped a simple gold band onto Nora's finger, his hands steady and sure, she thought of the journey that had brought them to this moment, a desperate flight through a blizzard, a chance encounter on a snow-covered road, 7 days in a cabin that had become the foundation for a lifetime together. "I love you," Dawson whispered as the minister pronounced them husband and wife. "You and our children." Nora's heart swelled at the words, at the way he claimed Emma and Elijah as his own without reservation. "And we love you," she whispered back, "more than I ever thought possible." As they turned to face their cheering friends and family, Nora caught sight of the mountains beyond the town, the same mountains that had nearly claimed her life in their winter fury, now standing as majestic sentinels over the new life she was beginning. From death had come life. From desperation, hope. From a chance encounter in a blizzard, a love that would warm them through all seasons to come. And as Dawson lifted first Emma, then Elijah into his strong arms, his face alight with fatherly pride, Nora knew with absolute certainty that being left in the snow that winter day had not been an ending, but a beginning, the first step on a journey that would unfold over years and decades, through joys and sorrows, always anchored by the love of the man who had lifted them all into his wagon and into his heart.